Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the glistening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea.
We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. These are the powerful words of Amanda Gorman's inauguration poem. Hello, everyone. My name is Soribel Henao, and I'm so excited and proud to welcome you to our 2021 Black History Celebration. As one of the inaugural Provost Diversity Fellows, Professor of Educational Leadership, and a member of the Black and Latinx Faculty and Staff Association, who without each and every member, this would not be possible. Thank you, BLFSA. I am thrilled to be part of such an important endeavor here at Queens College. Our theme, Sankofa, reminds us that in order to understand our present and ensure our future, we must know our past. Today, we welcome you to learn, be a part of our history beyond February, and are looking forward to an amazing program. Thank you.
I am both honored and pleased to join you at this kickoff event as Queens College celebrates Black History Month. We look at the past and present, and we look ahead to the future. If we were on our beautiful campus, we would be speaking at a luncheon or conference, although I regret that we cannot meet in person this year. We're so fortunate that we can hold this event virtually, making our lineup of activities even more accessible than ever before. Let me begin with a huge thank you to all those who have organized such a wonderful schedule. We have done this in record time within the constraints of the pandemic and with reliance on technology that can run the risk of defeat while you're on the path to victory. Everyone involved has proven to be a winner. I want to thank our sponsors, including the Office of the Provost, the Queens College Foundation, the Kupferberg Center for the Arts, and the Louis Armstrong House Museum. Special thanks to Soribel Henao, the Provost Diversity Fellow, the Black and Latinx Faculty and Staff Association, known as BLFSA, and the Center for Ethnic, Racial, and Religious Understanding, known as CERU, and the Office of Student Affairs for organizing the calendar for all of February and for all the work that they do beyond this month. I also want to thank especially Professor Deirdre Flowers, the interim director of the Queens College Africana Studies program. She served on the committee for our recent Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. event entitled The Time Is Now, Forward. That program was a resounding success, received with praise by so many who attended. If you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, I hope you'll do so on YouTube. We have a full calendar of events for Black History Month. Join us to celebrate Black history, culture, and achievements, while also addressing today's struggle for racial equity. The Louis Armstrong House Museum, the Kupferberg Center for the Arts, and the Godwin Turnback Museum all will host events celebrating and presenting Black artists. We'll host many talks by academics and activists and others. That includes QC alum Khalil Anderson, who recently became the youngest Black member ever elected to the New York State Assembly. Permit me to say a few words about the context of our era. Prior to coming to Queens College, I was a professor at Howard University, one of the preeminent historically Black institutions of higher education in this nation. More than any academic study could have done, my time there illuminated for me the prejudices I held despite myself, the privileges I enjoyed while barely noticing them. I learned more than I taught. Almost all of my students, my colleagues, my friends there, had had direct experience, which I would not doubt, with bigotry, if not daily, more than often enough. Throughout my own life, I faced children on the sidewalk challenging me to kung fu fights and teasing and taunting, but I have not witnessed their parents crossing to the other side of the street or scurrying along because they assumed and signaled without saying a word they thought I might be a thug or worse. That hasn't happened to me once, ever. The preeminent thinker about these matters, a race man for whom that designation was perfect, a public intellectual before the term had been invented, W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the founders of the NAACP, declared that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. He continued, the relation of the darker to the lighter races of men in Asia and Africa, in America, and the islands of the sea. No doubt now he would say races of men and women. He was prescient. These issues are with us still today. In 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, we all witnessed so many racial injustices. Many among us were acutely aware of this all along, but they were revealed publicly in a manner that could not be denied, captured on camera, described in compelling personal testimonies. These events appropriately provoked discussion and action, determined Black organizing for social justice, inspired people of all backgrounds, not only in America, but around the world. We believe it has become more important than ever to celebrate Black History Month. We hope that the past and the present of the Black community will be discussed meaningfully within the intellectual traditions of Queens College to bring about understanding and change. I am determined for what we profess as shared ideals to be practiced as a shared reality. At this time, I'd like to introduce our Provost, Elizabeth Hendry. She'll bring greetings and her perspective on the events and programs that we have in store for the month of February and well beyond. Betsy.
Thank you, President Wu. Let me also welcome all of you to Queens College's celebration of Black History Month 2021. Of course, given the pandemic, it'll be a virtual lineup, but we have many exciting events scheduled. I'm going to give you a preview of some of those events and then introduce today's speakers. But first, let me give you some thoughts about Black History Month 2021. In a recent Black History Month, we used the word Sankofa as a theme, and I have been thinking about that word as we planned for Black History Month 2021. It is a concept from Ghana, which means that one must look back in order to move forward. It's symbolized by a bird holding an egg in its mouth, representing the future, but looking back over its back. It's a very appropriate concept for Black History Month, which looks at the African diaspora and its aftermath and over 400 years of Black heritage in this country. It's particularly a posit this year as we look back at 2020 and the upsurge in the Black Lives Matter movement. I truly hope that 2021 will be a beginning in this country of eradicating systemic racism, but we cannot do that unless, as is symbolized by Sankofa, we look back and understand our history. We have some wonderful events planned for this February and beyond. I would like to thank all of our sponsors and all of the faculty, staff, and students who have worked so hard to make this year's events possible. I would like to especially thank Professor Sorabel Hanau of our Department of Education and Community Programs. She is serving this year as a Provost Diversity Fellow, a new program that we've inaugurated this year. And I thank her so much for her work in organizing our celebration. Coming up this Wednesday, February 3rd, our own Francois Pierre-Louis of the Political Science Department will speak about revisiting the Haitian Revolution in the era of Black Lives Matter. On Friday, February 5th, QC alum and Assembly member Khalil Anderson will speak about youth activism. To mention just a few of the many other events scheduled, on February 10th, Suzette Yasmin Rowbottom of Facebook will lead a panel on Black women in tech. On February 17th, Dr. Bettina Love of the University of Georgia will speak about the Abolitionist Teaching Network. On February 19th, there will be a session on jazz in the Black community led by our own Professor Antonio Hart and jazz legend Dorothy Kirk. On February 20th, the Kupferberg Center will sponsor the Music of Haiti. I hope you will be able to participate in these and many other events. Today's speaker is Dr. Deirdre Flowers of the Queens College History Department. She serves as interim director of the Africana Studies program. Her work focuses on African American women in higher education, particularly at historically Black colleges and universities. Dr. Flowers will be introduced by Zaire Kalut, the president of the Queens College Student Association. Zaire is a sociology major and a junior. Please welcome Zaire Kalut.
Thank you very much, Provost Hendry. Now I would like to welcome Dr. Flowers.
Good afternoon, all. Today, my charge is to deliver a talk about Bennett College's women students' involvement in making social change in early to mid 20th century America. Before diving into this discussion, I am providing a brief history of the significance of Black History Month. During the early 20th century, it was a commonly accepted fact that Black people, African Americans, had little, if any, history of note that showed a contribution to American society, other than their subjugation during the 246 years that forced enslavement was an acceptable practice in the United States. This is a myth that has been proven wholly false, due in large part to the efforts of Dr. Carter G. Woodson and those he influenced and inspired with his life's work. Dr. Woodson is credited with documenting the evolution and understanding of the roles African Americans have played in America's history. It was Dr. Woodson, a child of formerly enslaved persons, who recognized that there was a dearth of information on the accomplishments of America's Black citizens. In 1915, just 3 short years after receiving his PhD from Harvard University, Dr. Woodson founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. The following year, the association launched its journal, the Journal of Negro History, to document research Black scholars conducted that revealed the impact African Americans made on the social, political, and economic systems in the United States. In 1926, Dr. Woodson initiated the celebration of Negro History Week, which since then has evolved to a full month observance and celebration during the month of February. Personally, I think of it as 6 weeks, beginning with the observance of the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Beyond the creation of the association, the journal, and Negro History Week, Dr. Woodson saw the need to ensure that Black children were aware of our collective history. Therefore, in 1937, the association launched its Negro History Bulletin, later renamed the Black History Bulletin. The monthly bulletin's main audience was high school teachers, and all 4 of these ventures are still in operation today, with names slightly changed. And you'll hear that in a little bit. Dr. Woodson's work was driven by his steadfast belief that Blacks should know their past in order to participate in the affairs of our country. He also believed that Black history is a firm foundation for young Black Americans to build on in order to become productive citizens of our society. This is something we must keep in mind as we cultivate the Africana Studies program here at Queens College and throughout the CUNY system. We must offer engaging and challenging courses that expand the knowledge and breadth of the African diaspora, providing students with research and mentorship opportunities, and that we fund the operation of these programs so that students have a full experience in the study of African American and African diasporic history. Now I'll go back to Dr. Woodson. Also known as the father of Black history, Dr. Woodson often noted that those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from the teaching of biography and history. Dr. Woodson credited his father for influencing the course of his life. His father insisted that learning to accept insult, to compromise on principle, to mislead your fellow man, or to betray your people is to lose your soul. For Woodson, history was not the mere gathering of facts. This is an observation I made several years ago as well, and it put me on the path to study history, specifically the involvement of women, college women in the civil rights movement. Woodson continued, stating, "The object of historical study is to arrive at a reasonable interpretation of the facts. History is more than political and military records of peoples and nations. It must include some description of the social conditions of the period being studied." Now, I'll turn to my own research. Remember a few minutes ago, I stated that Dr. Woodson had started an organization. Its name is now the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And he also created a journal, which has now been renamed the Journal of African American History. The work that I'm about to discuss was published back in 2005 in volume 90 of that journal. And last December, I had a more recent article published, which is on a Harlem-based educator that I will talk about at another time. So today marks 61 years ago that 4 male students from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College took a bold step towards dismantling segregation. They staged a sit-in at the Woolworths counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. For years, I never paid a bit of attention to this piece of history until one evening in February 2003, while seated in the Langston Hughes Auditorium at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, listening to Dr. Janetta Besh Cole and Dr. Beverly Guy Sheftall discuss their then new book, Gender Talk, The Struggle for Women's Equality in African American Communities. Dr. Cole at the time was president of Bennett College for Women after having served as Spelman College's president. She mentioned that very little research had been completed on the involvement of Bennett College's students in the 1960s sit-ins. Bennett, like North Carolina A&T, is an HBCU, a historically Black college or university, also located in Greensboro, North Carolina. Bennett and NC-A&T are 2 of over 100 historically Black colleges and universities that are outgrowths of the schools created in the years following the Civil War to educate the nearly 4 million formerly enslaved men, women, and children. Bennett is one of 2 remaining HBCUs that provide education solely to women, and that would be Bennett and Spelman. Those are the 2. The truth of the matter is, that evening, I was in that audience just to listen, not realizing that one simple statement from Dr. Cole would lead me to interrogate why Bennett's women had not received the recognition they were due as active strategists and participants in the student-led sit-in movement. Her remark eventually set me on a path to pursue a doctorate in history and education. I was already acutely aware of the omission of women's contributions in much of the history that documented the modern civil rights movement. I noticed in the images I saw from the period's videos and photographs that there was a full spectrum of African Americans protesting injustices, men, women, and children. However, finding little literature on women college students' contributions, college students' contributions was difficult because the literature primarily focused on male leadership. What follows is a combination of information from the 2005 published article and new information uncovered while researching and writing my dissertation. In November 1959, several Bennett students made plans to stage a sit-in in Greensboro. The college's president, Willa Beatrice Player, rejected the idea because of the disruption in momentum that would occur because of the semester break in December when students left campus for the holiday. However, once the sit-in started on February 1st, 1960, and during the 3 years of intense activity in Greensboro, Player's overwhelmingly supportive stance was unique among local college presidents. Dr. Frederick Patterson, the chairman of Bennett College's Board of Trustees, expressed his support of the students' actions and noted his regret that the protests disturbed the peace and tranquility of a community. But once an issue has been joined or faced up to, there should be no turning back until the issue has been successfully resolved. Because segregation on the basis of race is morally wrong, legal segregation, in his opinion, was a needless and cruel affront to the dignity of one race that encouraged arrogance and bigotry in the other. In this situation, both races suffered, he said. Patterson believed Greensboro's problem was the result of Southern custom and tradition becoming confused with contexts of a personal and social nature. Speaking before a Boston audience in May of 1960, Patterson showed support for Bennett's students when he observed that the demonstration should be viewed against the backdrop of non-compliance with the law in the South and the total pattern of discrimination. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. expressed the following sentiment about the student-led sit-ins. These demonstrations are not merely protests against the refusal of service in eating establishments. These were protests against such things as limited job opportunities for Negro graduates. What I am discussing in the next few minutes is Bennett College for Women and its commitment to preparing African-American women to be change agents in American society. A few things struck me about the absence of their contributions in this seminal, very public act of resistance. First, the institution was a college for Black women. Their absence is very similar to the absence of women's organization and their tactical execution of plans that made the various protests and campaigns of the civil rights movement successful. It seems their work was secondary to that of men. It also appears that women were not viewed as active participants or initiators of activism and protest, as men were acknowledged as the initiators of protest activities and leaders of the movement. An example of this is the Montgomery bus boycott, which occurred 5 years before the student-led sit-ins began. It made Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks household names and jettisoned King to the fore as the leader of the civil rights movement. We do know he did not do this by himself. It was the work of the members of the Women's Political Caucus that played a key role in galvanizing support for the Montgomery bus boycott. Just as the authors of the book, Women in the Civil Rights Movement, Trailblazers and Torchbearers, did following their 1988 conference, which spurred the writing of that book, I did a little more searching to find the truth behind Dr. Cole's statement. It became clear to me that not only were Bennett College's students' contribution to the sit-in movement significant, but also that their engagement in protest and activism did not begin in 1960. Nor was Bennett College like other HBCUs, which are broadly characterized as conservative institutions. In fact, protest and activism at Bennett College dated back to its reorganization as a college for women in 1926, and the decision to hire David Dallas Jones as its first president. Under his and his successor, Willa Beatrice Player's leadership, Bennett College became an activist institution whose concern for its local community and Black Americans throughout the country and abroad has been expressed and enacted almost since the day it was reorganized as a college for women. Bennett College and its students challenged many of the gender roles and norms expected of Black college-educated women during the early 20th century. Historically, Black colleges and universities at one point were expected to raise an army of teachers and preachers to guide the race out of their hundreds of years of political captivity, forced illiteracy, and moral degradation. Bennett did this by breaking the mold for the traditional model of Black womanhood. Many of the college's rules encouraged Black citizens to conform to the behavior and norms of mainstream American society to show that Black citizens were worthy of respect. They then were able to advance an agenda that worked to dismantle segregation, discrimination, and Jim Crow laws that hindered Black Americans' full access to and exercise of their citizenship rights, rights that by mid-20th century had been denied them for nearly a century. The college showed through its students and alumni that Black college-educated women were intellectually capable of problem solving, cooperating, and competing with white citizens. They also proved that a college education does not necessarily drive a wedge between the educated and the uneducated, that Black women could be educated for self-fulfillment versus only for certain occupations, and that they were capable of moderating their own behavior without the imposition of excessive restrictive rules. Part of Bennett College's mission was to ensure that its students and alumni knew they had a place and a voice in American society by virtue of their citizenship. The college strove to ensure that the education provided to its students offered numerous opportunities to voice their opinion through traditional campus activities, off-campus volunteer work, fundraising, service opportunities, as well as through interactions with external partners. The college's emphasis was on preparing its students and graduates for careers other than teaching, homemaking, and domestic work, which were typical occupations for Black women at that time, as well as focusing on revising the curriculum and developing a co-curricular program that taught students useful skills. This shows Bennett's commitment to preparing students to take on leadership roles once they completed their studies at the college. The Jones and Player team understood that a solid curriculum paired with a thoughtfully composed and administered co-curricular program empowered and inspired students and would encourage them to become leaders once they departed the campus, adding their voices to those seeking a solution to the world's problems. So in writing the dissertation, I used the work of 4 Teachers College, Columbia University graduates, all African-American women whose research and writing guided the parameters by which I assessed Bennett College's students' proclivity and willingness to engage in protest and activism between 1930 and 1960. I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of those 4 items, and then I will bring it to a close. Lucy Diggs Slowe was the first African-American Dean of Women at Howard University, another historically Black college and university. Slowe conducted a survey in 1932 of institutions that educated women to understand whether the colleges consciously attempted to prepare Negro women for intellectual participation and leadership. About 60% of the surveys were returned. Slowe concluded, based on the low numbers, that very few colleges had intentionally set out to prepare Black women for their place in the social order, whether that place was in the home or in the professional or business world. In conducting the survey, Slowe envisioned Black women in new places and understood that a large number studying psychology were likely training to be teachers, which is a traditional occupation, or was a traditional occupation at that point. Questionnaire responses revealed that less than half of the responding colleges gave Black women students an opportunity to participate in self-governance. Only 27% had student councils, while almost 7% had dormitory self-governance and women's leagues. Based on the survey feedback, Slowe was discouraged by the lack of organizations and opportunities for Black women to govern themselves. It was her belief that self-governance was the only kind of governance worthwhile in an intelligent community. She viewed this type of participation as vital to the development of good citizens, as this learning opportunity provided the ability and training to understand the customs and laws by which people are governed, and was fundamental to fundamental for all participation in the activities of the world. In her 1933 Opportunity magazine article, Slowe acknowledged that industrialization, the achievement of full citizenship rights, and the ability to participate in civic activities contributed to changing the lives not only of white women, but Black women as well. Therefore, their education must prepare them for participatory citizenship. Slowe resolved, Negro women must be prepared for making their contributions to solving the problems of the world. Further, it was her belief that the college must provide opportunities not only for her intellectual development, but also for development of her powers of initiative and self-direction. She concluded, every college woman has a right to expect her college to fit her to approach these problems in an intelligent manner. Our American life is so organized that there must be more and more group cooperation, as well as increasing interest on the part of the individual in the welfare of the group. It seems then necessary for the college to provide the student with some experience in group living, group cooperation, and group welfare. The second person is Marion Vera Cuthbert. Similar to Slow, she was the first African-American woman to serve as Dean of Women at Brooklyn College. Her 1942 dissertation was entitled Education and Marginality, a study of the Negro College woman graduate. She concluded that the Negro woman needs to accept the full implication of leadership, which her position assigns to her. That included taking on the challenge of interracial work to teach white people about the Negro people, specifically sharing a fresh wisdom winnowed from many hard experiences that would contribute to our evolving society. She also called for Black women to be actively concerned about opportunities for the growth and betterment of Negro women's status, to free Black citizens from stereotype thinking and the white world from stereotypes about the Negro, particularly the Negro woman. Willa Beatrice Player, Bennett College for Women's second president, entitled her dissertation, Improving College Education for Women at Bennett College for Women. Player's dissertation research on Black women's college education at Bennett College focused on assessing the effectiveness of the curriculum from the alumni and undergraduate perspective. Essentially, it seemed that Jones and Players enacted at Bennett College the results of Slow's research. Similar to Slow and Cuthbert, her research found that alumni believed more focus was needed to prepare Black women to be participatory citizens and leaders, as well as developing effective ways to deal with problems in the Black community. Player led the college's curriculum revision committee during the 1940s. And last, Jean Levita Noble, the 12th national president of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, was the first African-American woman to be made a full professor at New York University's Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. Similar to Cuthbert's work, Noble's research on Black women's college education sought to understand the Black women college graduates' experience. Noble's conclusion was that Black women felt that the result of a good education should be a moral one. The result of their education would lead to the development of integrity and strength of conviction. For Black women, colleges were to seek ways of cultivating the seeds of self-reliance and self-expression. This belief is similar to Slow's idea about Black women's education expressed in the 1930s, that education would provide the student with the courage and spontaneity to face the choosing of an occupation of her choosing, and not one expected of or prescribed based on her gender, race, or community need. The final outcome of Black women's college education should be a strengthening of the student's freedom to become what she is willing and able to become. It would include a daring to dream as well as to labor, a daring to pursue as well as to conform, a daring to love above all else, to be true to self, or to strive to realize that trueness to self, strive to realize what trueness to self could mean and what it will involve and what it will cost. Traditionally, the academic and student life curricula at Bennett College was designed to promote social justice. By engaging its students in co-curricular activities that required them to plan, coordinate, and execute events, as well as participating in the annual homemaking institutes, which I did not discuss, Bennett students were exposed to many real-world problems and events. Their physical presence and contributions to discussions informed the world that Black women's roles were in many, many places. They could be wives and mothers, or professionals, leaders in industry, education, or any combination of these three, or any combination of these. Their place was in the home, if they so chose, in the classroom, primary, secondary, and college, in offices, lobbying, elected officials, etc. In short, wherever Black women chose to be, their voices were lifted to express concern about social issues that affected them because of their gender and their location within their local community, state, the country, and the world. With that information, it is very easy to see how and why Bennett students were actively involved in the 1960 sit-ins and all of the activity in the early to mid 60s in Greensboro, North Carolina. That is all I have for today. Zaire, are you ready?
Thank you very much, Dr. Flowers. That was very inspirational. And I read your work and I realized that today is a very special day. It is the anniversary of the start of the 4-month-long sit-in movement that you wrote about in your publication. So my question to you is, what inspired you to write the launching of the student sit-in movement, the role of Black women at Bennett College, and with a special focus on Black women?
The class that I was taking in the spring of 2003 was a class on American education and the civil rights movement. And the professor was actually looking to develop student papers that could go in a student issue of the Journal of African American History. It actually ended up being a double issue. And I went to the Schomburg that night. I was just like, I need to download, I need to just sit and figure out what I want to do. And hearing Janetta Cole say that, and then, searching around, I felt like a madwoman. I was like looking everywhere for something. I was like, surely it has to be somewhere. But indeed, it was not. It was not in a lot of places. It was sitting in some archives. It was in the memories of many of the alum. And it just proves that as historians, of all the history we have, we do not have everything just yet. And looking, my early questioning in life about women's involvement in the civil rights movement, coupled with that, just had me on this search for this material. And I wrote this before I even thought about applying to a doctoral program. And because I had this material, and at that point, it was literally just a box of stuff, I was absolutely convinced that those people in that box that I had talked about were calling me and telling me I needed to write. So I applied for a doctoral program knowing that that would be my topic. And the best part about it was the more that I searched, I kept finding like little Hansel and Gretel crumbs, here's a piece, there's a piece. But the day that was most special for me was I was in Greensboro. I had gone to the archives for about a week at Bennett, and I was leaving to catch my flight. And I said, let me just check this one more box, right? And I checked that one more box, and inside of a manila folder was a little newspaper clipping that actually talked about the students and their protests. I think it was in 1937 or 1938 when they actually boycotted a movie theater. So I knew that I was onto something. And then I moved on to other sources like the student newspaper, the yearbook, and other literature that I was able to find to complete the dissertation.
Yes. So you are a Bennett alum, right?
No, I'm not. I have the pennant back there because it was my inspiration while I was writing. But it is the second HBCU that is closest to my heart. The first is Hampton University, which is where I went and I graduated from.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so my question is, why is the past of these women so pivotal to the movement and the present?
It's pivotal because we rarely envision Black women as radical and as the people starting stuff. But quite frankly, I think that we probably are the ones who are most likely to say something and stand up. As a group, I think that, we have been in some ways looked over and pushed around a lot. And you get to this point where you're just not going to take it anymore. And people have not been taking it anymore since, the early part of the 20th century. And there is this long line of activism and protest that runs through. And you will see, if you study things, you will see that that Black women have been at the center and at the fore of making social change. One of the most recent books that I read was Vanguard, and it's a book by Martha Jones. She actually happens to be the granddaughter of David Dallas Jones, who was the first president at Bennett. And she uses that book to talk about Black women and voting and how we fought for the vote.
Yeah, so I have a follow-up question. How do we authentically break the cycle of Black women doing work and being looked over for it or not given as much credit?
We simply continue doing what we do. We continue doing what we do, but we also push those people that we send to our state capitals and to our national capital to make laws and to help govern us to make changes.
Thank you. So yes. So I'm going to take it to a bit of a different view here. So what was the most fascinating thing that you've learned while doing this research?
I think I'd have to say what was surprising to me is that those 4 women whose research that I used in my dissertation, they were all Teachers College, Columbia University alum. David Dallas Jones also got his master's from Teachers College at Columbia University. So in the process, and I think I knew it just a bit, there are 2 things. Because of segregation and discrimination in the South, many Black students could not go to any of the white schools in the South. They couldn't go to the graduate schools either. Those states, Southern states, literally paid to send Black folks out of the state to go other places. And these folks did not go to just any old college. They were going to big name institutions to get these degrees. And then they were taking that learning back to these schools in the South. And that says something when you're thinking about them possibly going back to historically Black colleges and universities. And even if you're thinking about them going back to a K-12 environment. I'm reading a book now by Vanessa Siddle Walker called The Lost Education of Horace Tate. I think that's what it is. And when you read that book, we always think of the NAACP as being the organization that did all of the fighting in the courts for desegregation. Yes, they did, but they didn't do that without people. And there were people behind the scenes who helped the NAACP get to where they needed to be. And it's not just the plaintiffs in the case, it's the regular people, it's the principals, the folks in churches, and all of that who help make this, make changes come.
Thank you. And please add questions in the comments for the audience. If you have any questions, we'll be more than willing to take them. So please just drop them in the comments. So I have a question for you again. Have you ever organized a movement like this or been part of a civil disobedience movement personally?
Unfortunately not. This past summer, there was a march that was organized by the churches in Harlem. That was the first time that I actually went to a march that I recall. And, I went out, even though, we had COVID restrictions and such, and I was concerned about everything. I said, I'm just going to go out to do this. Because just the level of violence visited on Black and brown bodies in this country is too much. And we are still, revisiting fights that have been fought and we thought were resolved and settled and won, but we keep coming back to it because we, as a collective country, we are not making changes.
Yes. So thank you for speaking about the continuing violence in this country. I myself was also at some of these movements over the summer. And my question is, what is the future of peaceful disobedience and why is it important?
I think that the importance of it is that it shows our leadership that the citizens care. And this is important enough for us to come out in the period that we're talking about now, but to come out during a pandemic over the summer, we were willing to come out and say, you need to listen to us. You see us, this is us speaking to you, even though we're not having a one-on-one conversation. So we're showing our leaders that this is not the kind of life that we expect to live. And there was a second part to your question. Could you repeat that?
Why is it important? Why is this important?
Because we have to. One of my chapters in my dissertation had to do with Black women's role, place, and voice in American society. And the voice piece is what, even though we're not speaking, we are telling them unequivocally, this does not work, this is not good. And we should have, as people, as citizens, in the United States and as world citizens, we need to care about our fellow man or woman. I should have said woman.
Yeah. So you spoke about citizens of the US and citizens of the world. So that sounds very diverse. I was wondering, why is diversity in these movements important?
Because I think that it means that no matter what your race, religion, or ethnicity. You see the humanity in another person. And that's what we really need to be concerned about. We need to be able to see each other as human, not that you are Black or that you are Chinese or that you are Muslim or that you are Catholic. We can see it and we can know it, but we should not judge people based on those things, because at bottom we're all just an individual human being, and we need to get along.
Thank you. That's a very positive answer that I often don't hear. So my question is, do you think a lot of the times when we see movements of civil disobedience and protests, we often hear like, just wait and your time will come. So my question from your publication is, do you think that the women of these schools would have eventually gotten what they needed in their human rights without them speaking up?
No. You have to raise your voice if you expect something to change. Now, there are different ways to raise your voice. A few weeks ago, we had a very interesting demonstration of some people's views, and they attacked the Capitol building.
Mm-hmm.
It got attention, but was it the best way? There was loss of life, there was damage to property, and disruption of our government. There are ways to do things.
Okay. Yes.
And not saying there's only one way. There could be multiple ways. But yeah.
Yes. So my next question is, we're speaking about students, the students of Bennett College and college students at the time. And I saw that they inspired other organizations bigger than them. So my question is, what was the youth's importance in inspiring organizations like NAACP, CORE, SCLC for the civil rights movement?
Wait a minute, I had written that down. You said NAACP, right?
Yeah.
CORE,
Mm-hmm.
and SCLC.
Yes.
I think the NAACP and CORE. The NAACP may have had the most interaction with students, because I know that they had youth groups. I know CORE was around since the 1940s, and they had been actually doing sit-ins prior to the 1960 sit-ins that became associated with college students, and particularly the four at the NAACP. But for the NAACP, I think I say in the article that it was their kind of measured movement, and really only depending on the legal pursuit of changes that didn't seem to be working, or was going absolutely too slow. And when students physically put their bodies in places to challenge something, and because there was media at that point, there was television, this was going into people's homes, right? So they could see this, and it made a difference. So just as you think of the stuff that went on this summer with after the murder of George Floyd, even after the media coverage of Breonna Taylor, and I'm thinking Ahmaud Arbery, we can see this stuff on the news, and we are upset, and we have feelings about it. So it's the getting people to be able to see some of what is going on, and it's not just what's going on in the courts, or maybe even in the in the places of government where we are making our laws.
Okay.
Did I fully answer your question, or was there more?
No, you did. Thank you. Yes, you did. Thank you. So you spoke about legal pursuit during this answer, and earlier you also spoke about voting laws and voting rights. So I was wondering, while speaking about civil disobedience in the civil rights movement, what is the importance of voting during and after a movement?
The importance of voting. You are able to, well, let's just think about, we can think about the 2016 election and the 2020 election. You know, many people that voted in 2020 did not vote in 2016. And we got a leader who did some things that just were not in the best interest of our country. And in 2020, when folks decided it was time to vote, we came out and we voted for something different than the person that we had in that office. Your voting makes a difference. I think probably the most important voting may be at your local level. It's not just the presidential elections. You need to vote at your local and your state level. You need to vote every time, because your vote is your voice, and it is your opportunity to tell the people who are making the laws that are governing your life what you think. And you give them some direction in terms of how they should go.
Okay, thank you very much for mentioning the small elections, because I think the mayoral and the city council elections are coming up also.
Yes.
Yes.
Vote
and
local.
Local, yes. And you
Vote
mentioned
local and right on up.
Yes. And you mentioned the 2016 and 2020 elections. It makes me feel like I'm living in like live history.
You are. Every day you are living in the midst of history. Some history is being made every day, every single day, whether it's just your personal life history that you're remembering and thinking of, or something bigger, something that's happening on a national level or even on a state level, or something that's happening for women or something that's happening for children. There is history being made every day.
Thank you, Dr. Flowers. My next question is, what, from your experience of all of your work, would you like us to see that you bring to the Africana Studies Department at Queens College?
Repeat that for me one more time.
So from the experience of your work that you would like us to see as students that you bring to the Africana Studies Department at Queens College?
I guess I would think that from my work, students have a voice and they can enact change. One of the things, well, I didn't talk about it because you can't talk about everything in a very large dissertation in 20 minutes. Students at Bennett were actively involved in the student government, and they ran different groups or organizations on campus. And those being part of those organizations, much like you're the president of, is it the Student Government Association? Is that what Queens College calls it?
Student Association.
Student Association. You are getting a set of skills, and I'm actually impressed that you're here doing an interview. I'm like, yes, you're getting a set of skills that you may not get sitting in a classroom listening to a professor or having a conversation with your classmates and your professor in a class. You're getting a different type of an experience, and you're building leadership. And that was one of the things that Bennett College wanted to make sure that they built and they instilled in their students. And if you look at the other three women who wrote about Black women's college education, there was some undertow or some idea of leadership and leadership development in all of their work. And even with David Dallas Jones, he was a visionary. He was also involved in race work in Greensboro. That was his hometown, and he had gone out of Greensboro and had been in Atlanta and other places for a while, and then he came back to his hometown. And there's an interesting story in Martha Jones's book about him as well and his activism. But you are getting leadership opportunities and you're building skills for when you are on the other side of this degree. After you walk across that stage and they give you your diploma and you're ready to go on to, say, graduate school or to a career or to a volunteer service, whatever it is that you're going to do, you're taking away from college not only the knowledge that you got in your classes, but skills that will make you a better citizen of the country and the world.
That is very true. I actually learned that during the civil rights movement, I know it was a very long time, I spoke to one of the presidents, the Student Association presidents, and he himself was at Washington for Dr. Martin Luther King's speech. So it's amazing that you said that.
And I mean, you will find the more you talk to people from a generation or more before you, you will find interesting tidbits of history that they have participated in. And they may, not to say they may not think much of it, but because it happened so long ago, it may not be like, they may not think that it's the most important thing in the entire world, but then you find out about it and you're like, wait a minute. And sometimes you dig a little deeper and you find out that person was really, really important. And they're just like, I'm just a regular old person now. But there is much to be discovered.
He was very nonchalant.
Yes.
Yes. And before I jump into the final question, I'd just like to remind everyone, if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments and we'll be very happy to take them. And my last question for you, Dr. Flowers, is where can we find your publication if we want to read more?
The first, well, actually, both of the articles I wrote are in the Journal of African American History. I would suggest reaching out to Queens College's library to find out if they have access to the Journal of African American History. And then you can go on, log into the library, however you log in, find the journal, and then you can download the article itself. Let's see, I do know, I graduated from Columbia, and they have this portal on their website called Academic Commons. And I'm not sure if people who are not associated with the college would be able to download the information, but I put my publications there. So both of those articles are there, and a couple of other things that I wrote are sitting on their website as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Flowers, for your work at Queens College. I read your publication and it was amazing and a must read. It was very inspirational.
Thank you.
So thank you for that. Let me check for questions. Yes, so I don't see any questions as of now. So I would like to thank first Storybell for putting this together, for inviting me. I would like to thank President Wu, Provost Hendry, Dr. Flowers for her participation, and everyone else who had a part in this. Sorry.
You lost your voice.
Including the Black Latinx Faculty Staff Association. Thank you, and thank you to everyone who came and who participated in this event. And thank you very much for coming. I will see you next time.